You're listening to the Literary Atlanta podcast. I'm Allison Law. Last night, my husband and I had date night, which could also be characterized as our cleaning up, wearing something other than workout clothes, and Zach allowing me to drag him to another author event. We attended a conversation between Man Booker Prize winning author Marlon James and the incredible Atlanta author Nick Stone, who was a guest of this podcast last year. James is touring in support of his latest novel, Black Leopard, Red Wolf, which is the first in a trilogy that is being billed, accurately or not, as an African Game of Thrones. It turns out that James made an offhand remark in an interview that he was writing an African Game of Thrones, and that comment stuck. In fact, George R.R. Martin read the interview and emailed James to say that he was looking forward to the book. During last night's talk with Nick Stone, Marlon James admitted that he had difficulty selling Black Leopard, Red Wolf when he completed the manuscript. It was especially a problem in the UK. The first book is told from the perspective of Tracker. And the second two books, which James hasn't written yet, are essentially the same story, but told by other narrators that readers will meet in the first book. The UK publishers wondered, why should anyone read parts 2 and 3 if they're just different accounts of the same story? James said he also received the feedback that the book was too much of a fantasy book for his devoted fan base of literary fiction readers who loved his A Brief History of Seven Killings. That novel won Britain's most prestigious literary award, the Man Booker Prize, in 2015. James was the first Jamaican writer to win the Man Booker. This was an interesting topic to come up last night between a heralded male literary fiction writer and a younger woman, up-and-coming writer of best-selling young adult and middle grades books. This idea that we cannot cross-pollinate or appeal to different genres has to stop. We need to be more understanding and think that people have eclectic reading taste. And we as readers need to be more naturally curious and see other points of intersection. Otherwise, we're just going to read the same thing over and over and never discover new things or contemplate new ideas. James says he likes to take his readers outside their comfort zones, make them stretch, and I think that's an incredible thing to do. Nick Stone asked so many good questions, and James, who teaches creative writing and literature at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota, schooled everyone in the audience on various topics. He said when it comes to writing, he follows the advice he received early in his career from a mentor that he should show up and do the work every day. The theory is that if you set up a routine or a practice, if you're uncomfortable with the word routine, then the muse will show up. James says the writers are the only artists who wait for a fairy godmother of story or inspiration to visit them. Other artists, dancers, painters know they have to show up and practice in order to create. This week, along with the release of Black Leopard, Red Wolf, it was announced that Michael B. Jordan, who is most recently lauded for his performance in the Oscar-nominated film Black Panther, had acquired the film rights to the book. James said he's had a very few preliminary conversations with Jordan, but everything is in the very early stages. For now, he's content to say, Killmonger bought my book. I'm looking forward to reading Black Leopard, Red Wolf. You can still buy signed copies of James's books at Acapella this week. And Nick Stone is going to be guest starring at another book launch event tonight. At 6:30 p.m., she joins her friend Angie Thomas for an event to celebrate Thomas's new book, On the Come Up. This is a follow-up to her best-selling and critically acclaimed novel-turned-movie, The Hate U Give. That's happening tonight at the Atlanta Friends School. The last time I checked the website, it looked like some of the tickets were sold out, so you may need to check with Karis Books and More before showing up to attend that event. In last week's episode, you heard me talk with the host of another literary podcast based in Atlanta, What Are You Reading? In case you missed it, that's episode 53 featuring my talk with Ian North and Tim Rhodes. Well, I also had an opportunity in the last year to meet and learn from the creative minds and community builders behind yet another literary podcast, I'll share my conversation with John Carroll and Matt DeBenedictis of the Lit and Bruised podcast. That's next on episode 54 of Literary Atlanta. Atlanta is a book town, home to avid readers and host to some of the finest writers and storytellers on the planet. That's my thesis statement, and this podcast provides the supporting details through behind-the-scenes anecdotes, author interviews, and all of the ways that you can experience the rich literary landscape right here in Literary Atlanta. Here's what the Lit and Bruised podcasters have to say about themselves. Lit and Bruised is an Atlanta-based literary podcast hosted by John Carroll and Matt DeBenedictis. Atlanta's literary art community is known for its boundary-pushing styles, readings that are parties, and writers unafraid to push themselves while fighting to unite a community separated by deep transit limitations. Lit and Bruised is documenting this community that we love. Episodes are long-form conversations with local writers that feature readings and audio recordings from our always growing archive. In an effort to follow that format, I invited John and Matt to our home. It was Zach and me and John and Matt sitting around a table in our dining/living room area. We shared a meal and had a casual conversation. But here's where I messed up. I had just bought some new audio equipment that I hadn't properly tested. I'd never met John and Matt in person before, and even though we have plenty of friends in common and had built up a good rapport via Facebook and email, I was nervous to have them visit me at home and for them to kind of see my amateur setup for the podcast. So the recording was a minor disaster. The recorder would start and then stop. The original microphones that I had set up didn't work, so we had to do a different setup. It was just a mess. And Matt and John could not have been nicer about it. I felt like I had held them hostage at our house because they were here for so long. And Matt was like trying to troubleshoot things for me. And I just appreciated that they didn't laugh hysterically at me until they reached the end of our driveway. While I was unable to retrieve a few parts of our dinner table talk, I was able to go back and listen and recover these great nuggets that they had for all of us sitting around the table with one open mic. And the Lit and Bruised guys had some amazing insights that I could not resist sharing with you, including this beginning piece that kind of orients us. And this is Matt who starts off this conversation telling me the origin story behind the podcast name, Lit and Bruised.
Yeah, with any creative process, there's a darkness to it. That's something, for myself, when I got into writing in my early mid-20s, it was to deal with pain and work through a lot of anger that I was trying to figure out who I was. And that's a part of all creation of art. And it's going to get messy when you really talk about it, especially when we really want to get to know the people we have on, whether we've personally known them before, whether it's been someone who's just in passing, or when we've had someone like Lisa Cross Smith, it was this is the first time I've ever met you before. Mm-hmm. And then 5 minutes later, we're talking about malls.
Exactly. I remember listening to that episode because I'm familiar with that whole northern Kentucky quadrant.
Yeah. It's famous. That's actually the goal of Lit and Bruised, is to make northern Kentucky popular again. Or just for the first time. I don't believe that it ever has been.
First sponsor of the podcast is the Convention and Visitors Bureau there.
I would love to be sponsored by the Florence Mall.
What is that? I have no idea.
That's the mall that we were talking about on that episode.
Mall?
Yeah.
Florence, Kentucky, yeah.
Okay.
I think, the show has been... The bruised element of it is pretty amusing, though. But, I think everybody's gone through hard things. Anytime that you're creating anything, you have your... you're processing out loud. And I think even with we just finished the second season of the podcast... And Matt and I have both gone through difficulties, because it's just life. I mean, we've been recording since last August. So even on some of those episodes, you can kind of get a hint of us dealing with things in our own lives because, the show must go on, just because you're having a bad day doesn't mean, or a bad month or a bad year. It doesn't really matter. This is what we signed up for. And that's the fun of it with a podcast. Like that's as open as ours is. It's just kind of, hey, show up and let it all hang out if you want,
We've had guests come after they leave and just like, that felt like therapy.
Yes.
It's nice I feel like that's a very good compliment to get.
Totally.
You felt that comfortable to talk about all this and then kind of work through it. So that's totally a good reason why we do this. Because we're working through our own stuff as well and trying to be inspired, trying to feel the motivation that we need to continue on with our projects and our passion. So it's trying to create that feeling of, which I guess it kind of almost tied around to a lot of stuff is, I always thought about like after readings, going over to manuals and just everybody bullshitting with each other, talking about what's going on with their life, and then someone would pull out one of their poems or like read something on their phone while they're drunk, and it was just like, I think I'd like that in a podcast to capture that moment of we're talking about being creative together and just being humans together, and let's just explore that.
Do you go into each episode with kind of a list of questions or
Matt does all the notes. He writes up notes, and every once in a while there's a couple questions in there. But I mean,
don't really use the questions.
Yeah, I'm a loose cannon. I mean, that's the element of it.
I like to prepare and get in the mindset.
Yeah, that's why we work well. Is I can talk to a brick wall and I can just keep a conversation going. There's pros and cons to that, obviously, but Matt balances that out a lot with really kind of keeping it on task, and it's good though. I mean, there's an element of Lit and Brews that is allowing it to go into left field a little bit and exploring that, and it does have a way of coming full circle again. But but Matt definitely he focuses on the purpose of the show, where I feel like I'm like, what was that? Remember Loveline back in the 90s?
Yeah.
It was like Dr. Drew and Adam Carolla.
Are you saying I'm Dr. Drew?
Yeah, you're totally Dr. Drew. No, Dr. Drew was the best. Dr. Drew was awesome because Dr. Drew was always like saying like really profound things. I remember being like 14.
He was saying profound things, but he also basically manipulated people into getting help that he benefited from.
Well, yeah, but I mean, those people weren't, the people that were calling in weren't getting like Dr. Drew's help. Like Dr. Drew would just be like, hey, you're in a manipulative relationship with this guy.
Yeah, with Loveline. Yeah,
and I just thought that was interesting because I remember being like...
This is pre-celebrity rehab.
Yeah. I remember being like 14, 15 and like listening to Dr. Drew thinking, oh, that's pretty good advice, and like remembering that stuff as I got older. Adam Carolla was just on there to act like an asshole.
Yeah.
I'm on our show to act... kind of like an asshole. I mean, not obviously as rude and ridiculous as him. I don't think I'm rude. No. But I think that's kind of a similar dynamic. Words of wisdom, and then
I mean, you just
a mess.
You help with the fact that I got weird social anxiety and I have trouble starting conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I can just let's talk, let's go. So, I mean, I think that's fun. I think that's what makes our show interesting is that you do have the different personalities. With Matt and I, but the fact that we are friends and we do get along and we do see eye to eye, and it's not just two guys who didn't know each other forced together. So we have a good rapport, and that works well with the audience, I think, and with the guests, and to create all kinds of different kind of conversations. You never really know where it's going to go, and I think that's kind of the fun of it.
Yeah.
Well, I want each of you to take a turn and kind of talk about where this fits into your overall portfolio of literary endeavors or creative endeavors that you have going, because we've all talked about the fact that we all have day jobs, but then we are moonlighting and doing this other creative work. So tell me what other things that you are working on.
You want to go first?
Sure, why not?
You're so good at pitching.
I know. It's I'm just like, oh God, here we go. I love a new idea. I love an idea or a project that I haven't done before, or I'm not really sure of how to do it, because I love to learn new things. And with Lit and Bruised, I thought it was really cool because, we'd both done readings and been hosted things. So I didn't really think that it wasn't going to be an issue with actually doing the thing, but more so the production side of it. Thank God for Matt, because I probably would have phoned that in a lot. But for me, I just like to learn things. So to be able to sit down and get into podcasting and do, 30 episodes and have an idea.
Oh, I did the wrong button.
Oh,
yeah. Sorry, we paused for a picture if that doesn't get edited out. But just to learn that, I think that was really cool. And I actually take a lot of things out of passion projects and I bring them into my, the corporate life of being a freelance consultant on a marketing side of business. And so I think it's just good to be able to speak to clients and say, we actually just pitched a podcast to a client of ours, and he said yes. And I'm not running point on that, but I have dealings with that side of the project, and I was there to support the person who was pitching the idea to the client, because I was like, of course this is a wonderful idea. I mean, how do you not have a podcast? We have to do the podcast. So for me, it's just really it's more like another tool in my belt for the other projects that I do. So I love it though, and Matt has some further. I know Matt. We know what each other's going to say, and I agree with what Matt. I'm not going to even say it though.
Well, I also know what you're like omitting as well too. Like this also, I feel, plays a role in like Make Blackout Poetry. You started a community around basically be creative. Always be creative. If you don't feel like it, do it whenever you can. True. Keep the mind going. And then this is just a further extension of that conversation, but then putting it in the funnel of the Atlanta art literary community.
Totally. I mean, to be able to, because with Blackout Poetry, that is so focused online, and it's online. It's everywhere. And it's never had a super strong focus in Atlanta, other than the fact that I live here and I will do some art shows and things like that here from time to time. But it is cool to, be a promoter of creativity online, but then also to be able to put it, set an example of not just doing it in that project, but showing people how to do it locally as well. And I mean, I love Atlanta. I mean, I've been here for 20 years. I got here in high school. This is home. I think everybody at this table is a promoter. We run these things because we want to promote other people, and we want to encourage other people, and we want to highlight and create conversations. And I love that. And it's cool to be in a city that has so much talent that can be highlighted. It's just easy. You don't really like struggle with, oh, who am I going to get next week? Oh, I don't know. You've always got people. There's always someone out there. So, for me, I think it is about promoting and creating community. And that was a lot of the why we started on our end in general. I think we just love communities. I mean, I feel like you and I are always a part of a community. And maybe that stems back to like being religious in our youth, and no longer being that way, and not having a community, not having the church per se. Yeah. And I think
it's a regular topic on the show.
Yeah,
you've definitely gone there. You've hit politics, what music were you listening to when you lost your virginity?
We definitely get deep. I mean, and the religion thing just comes up, but I think that's the thing. I mean, I think you kind of make your own family. You build your own family. So through Lit and Bruised and any other creative endeavor that I personally work on, I like to create a community within it, because I don't know, just makes me feel more comfortable and makes me feel connected. And maybe and I've said it on our show, but Kurt Vonnegut had this quote. He said, "Hey, if you want something to do with your life, go out there and make sustainable communities that make people not feel so lonely." Mm-hmm. And I read that years ago, and it meant something to me then, but then when I read it in the last year, it kind of struck me as like, that means a lot to me, and I do that. And I realized that it's not just so other people don't feel lonely, but it's also for myself. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I mean, I have no problem being alone, but it's like, hey, I want to hang out with people. I want to connect. I want to, and not just the hang out at a bar and waste your 20s kind of thing, but like, let's create things together. Let's like, how can we make our community and our lives and each other better by making things, And so for me, that's really what Lit and Brews is about. And that's, in a sense, it's ties back into my corporate life, but it also ties back into my personal life as well. So.
Yeah.
That's a very long answer that goes all over, but I brought it home.
Yeah.
Look at that. Woo.
Have fun editing that.
Yeah.
No, I'm going to take the I don't know how much editing you do on Lit and Bruised. I mean, and you, Zach does no editing, and I'm like, God, you guys are smarter than me.
When we started, I did a lot of editing.
Yeah.
I was very concerned about, I stutter a lot. I was like, all right, I want to take control of this. I want to figure out how to do this because I want to make myself not sound stupid. And
I was doing that too. I do a lot of, because I did voiceover work, so I was like editing out all of the, breaths and stuff. And he was like, people know you breathe, it's like, okay.
I always find what I learned very quickly when I was trying to like originally just fix every little flaw was that with audio, you can't take something out. You can lessen something. And sometimes it's about where mic is placed. It's about knowing how the room works and kind of going for an overall sound design. When we started the podcast, my goal was to capture the honesty and the rawness of the early Red Fox stand-up recordings, when stand-up recordings were just called party records because you'd play them at a party, and the micings from the bars, because there wasn't even comedy clubs at that time, especially for Red Fox and other comedians around that era, was they would just have a mic just hanging from the ceiling and then just a mic on stage. So there was just a lot of open room kind of personality, in the same way like even you watch a 70s New York movie, they're miking like how their feet hit the floor. And I wanted to kind of capture that as well, especially because we had that whole bruised aspect. Mm-hmm. So between that and then also I make no bones about my love of hip hop. There's in how some intros are done for certain rap artists, especially for the producer Alchemist and stuff he did with Prodigy. Like he'd have these where you just have the mic on in the booth as they're just talking, and it'd end up being a rant, and it'd be kind of nasty the way it sounded, but somehow still warm and honest. And so between those types of two things, I wanted to capture that because I really wanted to create some type of experience with the whole. Also, we have people read as well. Mm-hmm. So to really capture that honesty through the audio, and that's so trying to capture that rather than clean every single little thing.
I think the other thing about this podcast is that I really was just obsessed with Pump Up the Volume in the 90s. And, I just wanted to be Happy Harry Hard On. So, I really wanted a Descendants track to be our opening theme song, but couldn't get that with copyright rules.
No,
so
that would have been too rough. We don't have epitaph money.
Wanted to talk hard. I haven't seen that movie in forever.
That did just like, wow.
Did you want me to answer the one question from earlier?
Where does this fit into your portfolio of creative endeavors, Matt?
Well, to kind of ride John's wave about community is, we both had that sense of community coming from religious backgrounds. We love the fact of this idea of meeting with people, and you live life together, you help each other out. You're people that you feel close enough that they're the family that you choose. And we've always kind of gravitated towards that. And when I got involved with literature, like the community really saved my life in a lot of aspects. It really helped me figure out who I was and what really matters to me. Because I left being a pastor and I lost nearly all my friends, my family, everything. So I had to rebuild from scratch. And the literature community welcomed me, welcomed my pain, welcomed my process of trying to figure out everything. I started out going to open mics at like Wordsmith, and I met people like Benjamin Carr, who does Gut Rinse Journal, met him there, and just like I then met like Blake Butler, Amy McDaniel, Jamie Iredell, and just the community welcomed me and welcomed trying to create something better.
Yeah.
And see what we wanted to kind of change in the world and also understand in the world and present that. And portfolio-wise, like I feel like we're just continuing to do that. I've done publishing, running 3 different presses, and what intrigued me about podcasting was I just saw it as publishing in just another medium, and really wanting to reach out to, like, we're taking in literature in different forms. Where does this go? That's why we have an archive on the website of, we want to be able to get old recordings of Atlanta literature readings. There's so much that people can still be influenced by. And we want to capture that, as well as we've done an exclusive. We put out we did the one exclusive for I'm Your God.
Yeah, with Jason Stanland. Yeah.
Who read out the Halloween episode, and that was the first time he had ever read.
Yeah, that was really cool. He'd never put anything out per se in terms of any form of publishing, and he'd never done a reading before. And I Am Your God is this really creepy piece that he wrote that is recorded with Siri's voice. Siri is talking to you about how humanity has given up control to technology. And it was a really cool piece to start out with. And
Siri reads it.
Yeah, it's Siri's voice. It's super creepy.
Yeah.
The first time I ever heard it, I was like, oh my God, this is...
Yeah, it was very odd. And to record it, like I just mic'd up his phone.
Yeah.
In a little box to kind of keep it so there'd be no outside noise. So it kind of, there's almost a little rattle from the phone you can hear, which kind of reverberates on certain words, and kind of almost like we got back earlier about voice and how that matters. But yeah, like, it just makes sense in publishing. Like, we had Jason on, it was his first reading. We had other people on where it's like they haven't done many readings or things like that. And it's just continuing on with publishing. And I want to hype the community that's been so great for me. And I want to continue to grow it and figure out the flaws we have. Let's work together. Like, it's been so great to see, like, the way Write Club and the Atlanta Slam community started working together, and just like everyone's kind of working together. And that's the way it should be. We have so many different influences. Let's work with that. And that kind of fits into everything I've kind of done. It just made sense. I mean, that's the work I do with Get Lit at MailChimp, the reading series with MailChimp that I work at with Corey Oliver, amazing poet who's got a book coming out in Publishing Genius soon.
Oh, great.
And like, that's the same thing. We're showing off the Atlanta community to people at MailChimp, as well as showing off writers who work there, and people don't know that there's writers writing code who also write amazing work as well too.
I think that's another important thing to realize, even with any kind of podcast or video or blogging or any kind of way, or any form of this, is that this is documentation, whereas it's going to be 10 years from now, next week, we'll be like, remember that time we recorded that podcast, or remember the time we hosted that podcast. And then you go back and you have these recordings, and they're online, so they last forever, and they're just out there.
You can download them in case there's a solar flare and we lose the internet.
Exactly. So I mean, and I think that's an important thing there to be able to look back on. Because we look back on the Atlanta lit scene from 7-8 years ago, and there wasn't a lot of recordings, and there's not a whole lot of that. So I think now, just with podcasting and everything else that's going on with the technology that we now have, we're just capturing a moment in time that's very cool. And I think that's almost like a time capsule, but then it's also something that helps people build their reputation and build their career as well, to be able to like go, well, hey, here's proof that this stuff actually happened.
And I think it's really cool that Lit and Bruised and Literary Atlanta started at basically the same time.
I know. We must have been channeling the same.
Yeah. There was some energy on. There were some other conversations going around in the community. I've been hearing people talk about podcast. Yeah. There's something going on. I expect there'll be a lot more.
That's cool. When did you start yours? In August of last year?
August the 3rd was the first episode.
Oh, that's awesome. When was ours? It's like I don't know. I feel like
it was around the same time.
Yeah.
But it was like
a couple weeks later. Yeah.
I think your first episode launched like a week or two before ours.
That's amazing. That's cool.
John actually went to his smartphone and found out that the first episode of Lit and Bruised aired August 5th, 2017. 2 days after the first episode of Literary Atlanta. It's funny to go back and listen to our chat with them now and recall that the idea for their show came out of them wanting to capture the after-party conversations and creations they had at Manuel's Tavern. That came full circle last November when Matt and John hosted a special after-party and readings as part of Atlanta's Letters Festival. It happened at Manuel's Tavern. It featured their famous yellow couch. It's an episode of the podcast that you can listen to right now. Go and subscribe and support the Lit and Bruised podcast. John Carroll just wrapped up a new immersive theater experience called Transgression Presents Clue, based on the board game or movie, depending on how you like to play. Those performances at the Atlanta History Center, I'm sad to say, sold out before I could buy a ticket. I'm hoping that I will be a bit faster next time. And Abrams published his Make Blackout Poetry book in September 2018. Matt is still working at MailChimp and is an integral part of building the Get Lit community there. I still owe him an advanced copy of the Beastie Boys memoir. I can give it to you the next time I see you, Matt. Maybe at an upcoming live literary event. Speaking of live events, there's plenty to see this week in Metro Atlanta, especially on February 13th. Valentine's Eve promises no fewer than 4 literary events at venues across town, including Charlie Jane Anders reading from her brand new novel, The City in the Middle of the Night, at the Euclid Avenue location of Karis Books and More. Remember, Karis is going to be open there for just a bit longer before relocating to their new home in Decatur near Agnes Scott College. Award-winning science fiction and fantasy writer Jeff Vandermeer will be in Athens on February 14th. First, he's going to do a special meet and greet at the Prince Avenue location of Avid. Then he's speaking at a special Global Georgia Initiative event at UGA's Senny Stovall Chapel at 7 p.m. And there are a couple of poetry events happening this week. Poetry Atlanta features Marissa McNamara and Amy Pence in Decatur on Monday. And next Saturday at Avid in Athens, poets Andrea Jurjevic, Chelsea Rathburn, and Jim May will be reading at 6:30 p.m. Remember, when you can, support these local booksellers and the authors they're hosting by buying a copy of the book at the event. Thanks for listening to this episode. As always, you can find links to the people, books, and events mentioned in the podcast on our website. That's literaryatlanta.com. You can listen to episodes there or download them wherever you like to get your podcast. Apple Podcast, Google Play, YouTube, Stitcher, Radio Public, or TuneIn. I'm Allison Law, your host. Until next time, take care and stay lit curious.